Kindness and stress are physiologically opposite. Most people assume that the opposite of stress is peace or it's calm. Physiologically speaking, the opposite of an experience of stress is an experience of kindness.
Okay, David Hamilton, thank you so much for joining me on the Know Your Own Psychology podcast. I'm so grateful to have you here. And I guess we'll just kick off right away and
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. So you, over the years, have become known as the kindness scientist, and you've written extensively on the topic. Can you just start us off by telling us a bit about who you are and what you do and what the goal is in the work that you do?
Well, I started my formal career really at the end of my PhD was in organic chemistry, which, believe it or not, has nothing to do with organic food. It's like adults who play with Lego blocks.
Okay.
But instead of using plastic blocks and wooden building blocks, we use atomic building blocks. But the idea is the same, exactly the same. Like a child's green block is my carbon, the blue block is my hydrogen. But the idea is exactly the same. Instead of building cars and houses, we build medicine. So I ended up working in research and development, mostly cardiovascular medicine, but also for a while on cancer. Yeah. And I really got intrigued with trying to understand the mind-body connection. I mean, ironically, when you're working in a drug development environment, it's not really the sort of place where you start to study the mind-body connection. But in a sense, it really is, because I being very scientifically curious, which has always been a thing with me, I started studying the placebo effect.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated with, not only the fact of the placebo effect, because that speaks for itself. For me, it was understanding how does that work and why does it work that way? And ultimately understanding that when you believe something or expect something or imagine something, that brings with it a whole heap of neurological and physiological changes. Yeah. And that, to cut a long story short, that is what introduced me to kindness. Yeah. Because I remember coming across a piece of research into a meditation style that I refer to as kindfulness. Yeah. So kindfulness is any meditation style that's like that when you're being mindful, but at least some of your attention is thinking kindly, is directed towards whether you're thinking kindly of a person or recalling an experience, but it doesn't really matter as long as a fraction of your time. And it was a kindfulness practice, otherwise known in the research as metta. And they were measuring the inflammation in the body. And what they found was a significant drop in inflammation and the inflammatory response to stress after just 6 weeks of a short daily practice of thinking kindly. And I was just, whoa, oh my God, that just literally blew me away. All that I understood about the mind-body connection, here was the first time I came across cultivating a mindset, thinking kindly. And what was amazing to me is the marker that they were using to measure the drop in inflammation was one of the same ones that I was very familiar with from my work in cardiovascular medicine. And the drop in inflammation was comparable to what we'd look for in a really good drug that we'd spent like $100 million developing. And I thought, isn't that remarkable? And that for me, as well as obviously having kind people in my life who've been huge influences in my life, that was where the direction of my initial work in writing books began to turn in the direction of kindness. And I started to research it and look into it, not formally at first, just gathering up all the pieces and filing it away until I thought, I've got so much stuff here, I need to share this with people.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, how that placebo effect works and how just very small changes in how we sort of, live in our lives and practice these things have such a huge impact.
Absolutely.
And so, career grounded in research, moved into writing. And you mentioned there the people in your lives, the influences in your lives. And that was one of the things that I was keen to think about, because as a clinical psychologist, I believe wholeheartedly in the power of modelling. And so I was curious about, who modelled kindness to you?
I would probably say two significant people. The first, I would say, my mum. When I was growing up, we didn't have a lot of money. Yeah. My dad worked in the building trade, and building trade in Scotland. When the winter sets in, a lot of the workers get laid off, and then you get in November, December before Christmas,
Yeah.
mean you've got no money at Christmas, and then they get hired again end of January, early February. And what happens is they lay off the ones that have been most recently with the company. So you end up, my dad ended up in that cycle where he'd get laid off every year and before Christmas and then hired again in February. But then because he'd only been with the company 10 months, he was one of the first to get laid off again. And it was that cycle that went for years. So when I was growing up, we didn't really have very much. And I remember my mum being so kind. My mum would sometimes, I would watch her. She'd make the dinner. That I've got three sisters, so really we have a family of six. And my mum would make out all the dinners, and then I would watch her taking maybe a potato from her plate and putting it on my dad's plate, and maybe cutting a wee bit of some off her plate and putting it on my plate, and distributing half her dinner among the rest of us. And I also, so many examples of my mum, just incredible generosity and kindness and caring. And I remember sometimes it even upset me. I got teary, one with empathy for my mum, but also that she was going without in so many different ways for the kids. And that kind of cultivated empathy in me. And I remember sometimes feeling teary at how kind my mum is and the sort of things she did. But that really shaped the kind of focus that I had and the type of person I became, because I realised how important that was. My mum was really an absolute tremendous model for me.
Yeah.
And then I suppose in my adult life, I'd say my partner Elizabeth was has always been a huge support. But where it was really obvious to me, we hadn't been together that long when I started writing my first book. And Elizabeth took all these. She's an actress, but actors and actresses can be in and out of work a lot. And in those early days of her career, she was in and out of work, and yet she took all these really routine small jobs just so that I didn't have to.
Yeah.
So that I could. And I remember sometimes she was giving out leaflets in the street, because that was a promotional set of job that you get paid like £60 for the day to spend the whole day in a city centre handing out leaflets. It was, she used to say it's brain numbing and embarrassing. And yet she would do that so that I could. And here I was across the road sitting in Starbucks writing my book. And I felt so bad, but she insisted that I do that because she believed in me.
Yes.
And I think those two major influences for me, it's sometimes when you have, as you to frame it in your question, when you have kindness modeled to you, I think it's such an inspiration, because you realise how it makes you feel. And surely I can pass that feeling on to other people. Maybe that's what makes the world work better.
Yes, I love that. I love that. And just interesting that you had so many women around you as well. And I wondered about gender differences and kindness. I don't know much about that, but just amazing models and people who were willing to go without so that you could have and create the life that you have now, I guess, as the writer that you are now.
Yeah.
Just generally, David, how would you say kindness benefits us if we can practice it daily?
There's a heap of benefits, but I think if I was to start psychologically, most people probably had the experience that kindness makes you feel good. Yes. I mean, the technical term we use nowadays is elevation. And elevation's a broad term, meaning any sense of feeling more elevated than you were before. When you get something, you help someone, it makes you feel good. Some people get a warm sensation. Some people feel great. Some people just feel there's a rightness to it. But collectively, we refer to it as elevation. But what that does, it goes beyond just a nice feeling. There's obviously brain chemistry that follows it. Dopamine, for example, oxytocin, if it's a face-to-face kind of thing. But when it gets really interesting is just like an experience of stress generates stress hormones. Experiences of kindness generate what I call kindness hormones.
Yeah.
And I call them kindness hormones because kindness and stress are physiologically opposite. Most people assume that the opposite of stress is peace or it's calm.
Yeah.
Peace or calm more represent the absence of stress, not the opposite. Okay. Physiologically speaking, the opposite of an experience of stress is an experience of kindness. And you find that the internal changes that follow kindness literally go in like a seesaw, they go in the opposite direction from kindness. And so what's remarkable is these kindness hormones actually act on and dial down the intensity of one of the primary stress regions of the brain. And so they literally cause an anti-stress effect, a neutralizing of stress effect inside the brain. And I think many people can relate to that in life. Like when you have an experience of kindness, whether the giver, the receiver, it can sometimes neutralize stress that fast.
Yes.
And where it gets really interesting is long-term practice of kindness, long-term cultivating a mindset of kindness actually causes physical, structural changes in the brain, just like any habit of thinking or way of being creates changes in the brain. We just tend not to think about it because many people still have this idea the brain is a rigid set thing, but it's always undergoing little tweaks in its fine structure through neuroplasticity, which is like the movement, the shapeableness of the brain. But regular mindset and practice of kindness causes a physical change in a region of the brain that plays a role in positive mood, happiness, and joy. And what that means, it's like a muscle that's getting stronger. It doesn't mean that if you be kind, you'll always be happy. But what it does mean is the physical changes in the brain that you're creating mean that happiness becomes more accessible to you out of the backdrop of the events of our lives. So that's the main mental health effect. It's also obviously an anti-stress effect, happiness booster, but also in the long-term protective against anxiety and depression. But physiologically, one of the main effects is on the heart. And kindness actually brings about a blood pressure lowering effect. And there's two reasons for it. One is it feels nice and it relaxes the nervous system. But the second is that kindness hormones themselves actually bind to the lining of our blood vessels, cause them to expand, which means the heart doesn't have to push as hard to get blood through. So we get a blood pressure lowering effect, which means kindness is actually cardioprotective, meaning it offers protection to the cardiovascular system. There's a heap of other things, but that's the main things.
Yeah, I mean, it's just mind-blowing, isn't it, that we have it within our gift and our power to do things every day that impact us on so many fundamental levels, our health, our happiness. I read a book a couple of years ago about, us having like a happiness set point. And I suppose what it's doing is helping us like add on to that. So if our set point's 5 or 6, we have the power to kind of add to that. And it just feels such an empowering message that you're putting out there about this stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now, kindness is such an important topic, and one that I think is made all the more relevant by our social media spaces at the moment. Now, you and I are both on TikTok. We've contacted each other via that a couple of times now, David. And I am really aware that on TikTok, on a daily basis, I quite often see a lot of toxicity, misinformation, and actually unkind interactions going on. Right. And I'm just keen to hear what you think we can do to tackle some of this.
I think doing exactly what you're doing, and I think exactly what I'm trying to do, is just flood, TikTok with positive messages and kindness and stuff. As is kindness counteracts stress, but negativity. I found it was counterproductive for me to engage with people who were being nasty online.
Yes.
And I just started blocking people. I don't have to do it very often, but I thought, am I really going to engage in that just nastiness for the sake of it? And I thought, I could, for the sake of my mental health, I could just remove that person from my channel altogether.
Yeah.
And that became my way of, rather than fighting them, I'll just deprive them of me as a target. And I'll just keep flooding out the positive stuff, the kind stuff. And I don't have to do that very often. And I think when you write about kindness, I'm kind of, maybe I don't get as much of it as perhaps some other people, I don't know what kind of stuff you come across, but my goal has always been to spread kindness and spread goodwill and nice things as often as I can, rather than wasting some of my energy trying to fight against or counteract stuff. Force creates counterforce, whereas power in itself is something different. So I think of kindness as a power thing. So I just do it without giving any of my attention to trying to argue with people, because you could do that forever.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right, isn't it? And it's, psychologically, if I think about the behavior of trolling online, what we know about that is that the more attention you give it, the more it feeds it. Yep. And it just continues. And so I think that's right, isn't it? It's putting out what you think is quality, kind, good quality information and just ignoring the bad stuff really and just trying to flood it. But it's such an interesting space, and I'm absolutely fascinated with it psychologically.
Me
how it
too.
works and how it feeds itself somehow.
Yeah, and do you know what I found? That sometimes I break my own rule, and every now and then I found myself just engaging scientifically. And I find it's a lose-lose, because when people troll like that, and they're really not, they're trying to make a point, but it's more just an expression of something. And it's a never-ending argument. And I thought, how much time have I just wasted re-justifying, putting a wee bit of science in, and I thought, I've just lost half an hour of my life here for nothing. And and sometimes if you put a really convincing argument, what usually ends up is an outpouring of anger. And I've had that, especially on Facebook, outpouring. I've argued a wee point for a wee while, which I rarely ever do. And then at the end, when realizing that I've made a really clever and coherent point, just a big personal insults and all that. And I thought, that damages my mental health. My life is more important than that. I'm not going to waste my time. So that's when I just started blocking people. As I say, I don't do it very often. I don't have to, because I don't engage in the first place.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And as you say, I mean, the stuff that I'm putting out there typically hasn't gained a lot of sort of negativity. But what's interesting is as I start to make more sort of controversial points, I think that sort of there's a real polarization that goes on. And I think you're right that sometimes it's just step away, put the information out there, step away. Thank you for sharing your experiences of that.
Actually, I had to wrestle with that a wee bit, because I thought, am I being unkind by blocking people? But then actually, but as I say, I don't do it very often. But then in my new book, the longest chapter of my new book, which is about kindness, the longest chapter is actually on how to be kind to yourself. And sometimes what you've got to do is find that balance where you're saying, is this too much for me? I have to protect my own mental health. And so what actions must I take to protect my mental health? And sometimes that means putting your hand out and saying no, creating boundaries. And sometimes for me, that boundary can be, I can no longer have this person on my channel because they're a disruptive influence and they post little comments that are angry and attacking all the other people on my channel. And I thought, I don't really need that. So as an act of self-kindness, I'm going to remove that person from my channel. And that's how I got clear in my head. It's about protecting your own, setting boundaries and protecting yourself, which is very, very important.
Well, it's so important. And I think it's one of the things that my patients struggle with most is self-kindness, self-love, and practicing loving kindness towards self is one of the hardest things I think we can ever do. It sounds like you've found the right balance there.
Not always. I'm a work in progress.
Yeah, aren't we all? Aren't we all?
Say,
And on that, going back very slightly, you mentioned your previous career in pharmaceuticals, and when you and I were engaging via email about setting this up, I was asking you some questions about this. And I felt people would want to hear a bit about it. So many of my clients, people I come across, have big dreams to change their life and do something different. Can you share a little bit with me about that leap of faith that you took and how you've become successful at doing what you love?
Well, the leap of faith I took is I had a great job in research and development. In fact, I'd moved up across. I was on one of these lists in the company where they see a potential, so they give you opportunities a wee bit above your station. And I went up and across the company. It was a fantastic opportunity, and it was kind of managing changes. And which was a bit of psychology, to be honest. It was having to understand people's resistance to change and communicate with people and try to make these kind of things happen. I was still in the science, still dabbling in the science, but it was a sort of up and across kind of thing. Deep inside, I always wanted to write a book and to teach. I think during my PhD, I was reading a lot, found myself really captivated with reading about the mind and positive thinking. One of my earliest influences, actually, I found a book. My mum struggled with postnatal depression after my youngest sister was born in the mid-70s, and I found a book in the school library for my mum, and it was brilliant for her, called The Magic Power of Your Mind. And it really helped. It didn't cure depression, but it taught her strategies like meditation and affirmations and mindset stuff that helped her navigate a course. So all through my teenage years, Mum and I would talk about these kind of things, and became that's actually why I was interested in the placebo effect, because my mum and I had so many conversations about the mind. And so during my PhD, I found myself reading a lot of this kind of material, and I thought, do you know what? I'm going off into an academic research development environment, but deep in my heart, I want to teach, and I want to inspire people and write books and stuff. But I put it to the back burner because I thought I failed my English at school in my first attempt. I can't write, I mean, I passed on my second attempt, but writing was not my strength, my skill set at all.
Yeah.
And anyway, it just became such a compelling thing for me. I remember I attended a Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within seminar. I think that kind of gave me the kind of motivation. I think sometimes it helps to have a coach, someone encouraging you, motivating you, or a therapist, somebody making you believe in yourself. And Tony Robbins at that seminar was all about, you can do anything you put your mind to, kind of thing. And I thought, that's it, damn it. I went to work the next day and I resigned.
Seriously, the next day?
The next day, yeah. It was the next day. It was a 4-day seminar. But it was because I always had this dream. I just didn't believe in myself. Yes. I didn't believe me, could write a book. I mean, Laura, I was halfway through my PhD, and my PhD professor sent me on an English writing course because my 21-month report, because in a PhD in chemistry, you do a 9-month report internally, a 21-month internal report, which goes to your professor and others to make sure that you're not wasting 3 years research time, that you're on the right track. Yes. My 21-month report, my PhD professor came down, and I'll make the language less colourful, but he basically took my report and he slammed it down the desk. He says, "Dave, this is effing shite." And he slammed it down. Oh, no. He was so angry with me because he knew I was doing good research, but he said, "Your attention to detail is awful. Your English is like you've never even done English at school. It's like, what is this?" Yeah. Kind of thing. And he sent me on, so embarrassing, he sent me on an English course to learn how to do paragraph structures and sentences. This was half the way through my PhD. Because you can pass science exams without being a good writer, and it was embarrassing, but it was also one of the best things I ever did, because that was the first time in my life I learned how to construct a paragraph. How I got through my higher English, my English exams at school, I have no idea, without really understanding how to construct a paragraph and how to do that. So I always had this belief, I can't write. I can't possibly write. I'm rubbish at it. But yeah, here was the internal struggle, because a huge part of me wanted to write a book, and it believed that I had something that I needed to say, and I needed to write it and to explain it to people. And so when I left the job through this motivation from Tony Robbins, I was 6 weeks into a 3-month notice period, where I woke up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night thinking, what am I doing? I can't write. And also speaking in front of people frightens the life out of me. What am I doing? But I'd already committed to it, and I just kind of had to keep going. And to be honest, I so lacked confidence, because confidence isn't anything I ever learned. I think in my childhood and teenage years, I had no confidence at all, really. And my mum had no confidence. My dad didn't really have any confidence, and that was very clear to me when I got to kind of high school, and that really came into its own when I tried to make my way as a writer and a speaker in the first year of doing it. I so didn't believe in myself that when I put my first advert for my first set 1-day workshop seminar I was going to do, I didn't even put a phone number on it, because I was scared in case somebody phoned me up and asked me something I didn't know the answer to. Yeah. So instead I said, if you want to go, send a check to the following address. So you can imagine how many people came to that. I had 13 people at my first event. 9 were family and friends. 3 people were there because my friend had met them in a cafe the week before and convinced them to go to buffer up the numbers. 1 person responded and they got a 50% student discount. So I took in £40 at my first event, and I was out more than 1,000. Yeah. And the following month, I had to cancel an event because no one had registered for it. And it all came down to the fact I didn't feel confident enough to do what I was out in the world trying to do. It's no surprise it was an absolute disaster over that first year. I went completely broke within a year. All my savings, all my shares in the company that I'd sold, everything was gone. I was absolutely broke within a year.
I love stories just like this because, you know, you're making it seem more possible, I think, for other people who are sat there listening to this thinking, there's something that I want to do and I just don't feel confident. And actually, it does lead me on to my next question, because I recently, when that book was out, read Why Woo Woo Works, and I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Oh, thank you.
And one of the stories resonated so deeply with me, where you spoke about a study where you spoke about girls' maths performance being so indicative of what they believed.
Yeah.
I struggled with, just like you, not with English, but with my higher maths in school, really struggled, never passed it. Got into my psychology degree and then realised at some point, if I want to be a psychologist, I'm going to have to teach myself stats. But then it was about the belief I had in myself to become a psychologist, and it mattered more, you know, and then I was able to do that stuff. And it's just fascinating to me how, you know, how much of our life is determined by our belief that we have about what is possible for ourselves. Like, and I just wondered if you could talk to that a little bit.
Yeah. So the study you're referring to was scientists, psychologists, actually. They'd taken, not a psychologist, not a scientist, I want to be specific and say it was a team of psychologists that did this, rather than organic chemists, for example. It was a team of psychologists. And what they did is they told over 200 students, half of them they said, all of them they said, it's a fact that girls score about 5 percentage points less than boys in maths. It's not a fact at all. They just made that up because they wanted to see what would happen. But they gave them two different explanations for it. One, they gave an explanation that said that girls are at a genetic disadvantage, that boys have an area of the brain that's fed by the Y chromosome, that's mathematical thinking. Girls don't have that, so therefore that explains it. The other half of the girls were told, you know, that 5 percentile points shouldn't really be there. It's just stereotyping. Ever since we're young, girls get given dolls and prams and boys get given the engineering things, and we are stereotyped. And even at school, teachers teach boys with more mathematical thinking and mechanical stuff and more flowery stuff for girls. And you know, it's just stereotyping. There really is no difference whatsoever. And what was amazing over the semester is the girls who believed that they were at a genetic disadvantage, they didn't score very well at all. But the girls who believed that it was stereotyping, they way outperformed those other girls. And there was no 5% difference at all. Mm-hmm. But that performance over the academic year really just came down to what they believed. And that's so true. You know, you with the mathematics, me with English.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that talks to so much of what I see in therapy is when people come and they're struggling with certain things in their lives, they've told a narrative or been told a narrative that they've taken on over years and years and years that they've believed about themselves without actually examining the truth and getting to the bottom of why those beliefs exist and what it's about. And I thought that was a fantastic study to kind of use and highlight here because, you know, I'm constantly trying to empower people to believe that something better is possible for themselves and their mental health, you know.
Can I give another kind of example? So even when I was at school, so I got hires, you know, for people who are not used to the Scottish education system. That's our version of A-levels in the senior exams. And my lowest science score was physics, and I barely just scraped by. And always in my mind, I always felt, God, I just can't do physics. It was just a thing that I just, you had to do it compulsory at university. I got 51%. You had to do 1 year of it. I got 51%. It was my lowest mark in my whole first year of university. And it was just always in the back of my mind. But then as an adult, I became so fascinated with cosmology and quantum mechanics. Mm-hmm. And even though I had this mindset, I decided to register for a degree, a part-time degree in mathematics and physics.
Oh,
and
wow.
You know, this is a sort of, that's me now. That's what I do.
Gosh, that's mad.
That's a disgrace, isn't it? That's a final year quantum mechanics, but it's heavy on the maths.
Yes,
you see.
like that.
But I done this for a couple of reasons. One is an act of self-kindness, is doing something that I have a passion for.
Yeah.
just because it benefits my mental health. I find it's beneficial to mental health if you can find something that interests you and then do it on purpose, knowing that it benefits you. And the doing it, knowing that it benefits you, makes it an act of self-kindness. And the second bit was me getting over this sort of belief that I couldn't do physics, and I've been away from maths for, God, 30 years.
Yeah.
How could I possibly go back and do it? And so I did it for the two reasons. It was growth for myself, and it's probably one of the best things I've ever done in my life. I'm 6 years into it, really.
Wow. And so you're doing that degree right now alongside all the other things that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, see, I find I only need to with maths and physics degree, one of the good things about doing open university science degrees is many of the modules are small modules, so you can actually get away with just doing a small chunk.
Yeah.
So I can get away in my final year with just chunking it into 30 credits. A whole final year is 120 credits. So I've actually stretched my final year over 3 or 4 years. I don't have time. I'm not doing it I don't need the qualifications. I'm not doing it for that. I'm doing it purely out of interest. I love doing it. It's fascinating. And it supports my mental health. I love the learning, and I love feeling like I've learned something new, and then I get inspired, and I integrate it into the work that I do as well.
No, I love that. And just this idea of, as an act of self-kindness, allowing ourselves to do things that we love, but, we struggle to find the time for, or that we've, told ourselves some sort of narrative about. It's amazing that you're doing it. Now, let's get on to your new book, because it looks amazing. I've not had a chance to read it yet, but it's been released at the beginning of July, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it's called The Joy of Actually Giving a Fuck. And you were just telling me before we came online that you changed the title and all sorts of things into the right. So can you tell us more about it and what made you want to write it?
Yeah, so if I can do a shameless plug.
Sure, show us it.
So that isn't actually the book that I originally agreed to write with Hay House. It sort of is. I pitched an idea called The Art of Kindfulness. And I'll tell you why I pitched the idea. Is because I came across some research on mindfulness meditation, and there was it was initiated by work and observations by Buddhist scholars who were concerned of the fact that mindfulness is so popular in the West, but it's not exactly in the same form as the traditional form. See, the traditional practically is, but traditionally, mindfulness meditation was part of a set of guidelines that were all about orienting your moral compass. So about helping us to think kindly, communicate kindly, and be kind and compassionate. So be accountable. Yeah. And so that for our thoughts, words, and actions, so that we make a positive difference to the community by recognizing you're not in this world yourself. We're all in this world together. So be a good person. Kind of thing. And they were concerned, what's the consequences of removing mindfulness meditation from that context? Because when it became really big in the West, it was John Kabat-Zinn wonderfully managed to get it into the West. He was one of the key players. He was an academic in 1979, as well as teaching at a local university. He was also working at a hospital, and he convinced the heads of primary care, pain and orthopedics to send patients that they can't do anything else with, people falling through the cracks in the healthcare system, send them to me. I've designed a stress reduction program. And he couldn't call it mindfulness. He had to strip away all the spiritual connotations. He had to strip away even all the angle towards being kind and compassionate. Because you can't go along around professing morals and ethics to what can be psychologically vulnerable people. Yeah. So he had to make it completely secular. So it was done for the right reasons. Had to strip all that away and make it a seated practice that helps. And my good, it was so helpful to people. In fact, so helpful that the head of the hospital actually brought it into within 1 year. It was so successful. The head of the hospital brought it into an official part of the Department of Medicine. Through a few iterations later, it became mindfulness-based stress reduction. Nowadays, most people learn it from an app. And the Buddhist scholar had said, slightly concerned that it was originally part of a whole context about being kind and compassionate, and there might be consequences. So what researchers started doing was looking at, does it have an impact on kindness? And what they found is mindfulness stretches you on the inside. It stretches you in the direction of your existing values, your existing personality. So kind people high in empathy who practice mindfulness become even kinder, because it makes you more aware. And if you're naturally high in empathy or kind, you become even more likely to be kind. But what the downside they found is people who are low in empathy or narcissistic, people who have a worldview and sets of values that are all about me, then they actually become less kind when they do mindfulness, less kind than they were before they even did mindfulness. So it literally pushes them in the opposite direction. And that was what the Buddhist scholars had been concerned about.
Yeah.
But then some other research found, but what if we bring back some of aspects of the traditional teachings, not in a formal setting, but what if we just give a little education about being accountable, being responsible for what the things that you say, taking responsibility for your words and your actions, and learning a wee bit about how we're all connected, and learning a wee bit about the psychological and the physical benefits of kindness. So when we did the mindfulness, does it make you kinder or more selfish study? Again, everyone became kinder, even people low in empathy, by just understanding a little bit about kindness. So a wee sprinkle of kindness onto mindfulness. In other words, kindfulness, everyone became kinder. So I pitched the idea based around that to Hay House for a book called The Art of Kindfulness. And obviously there was going to be more research around about that, but that was the central idea. But I was 3 months into a 7-month deadline, right? 20,000 words in, done a ton of, most of the research I'd already done. And I thought, you know what? I so believe in the message of kindness. And I don't think this is going to work on its own. I don't think this concept alone will reach. I would like kindness to get into mainstream. You know, we talk about it, we understand, even get into schools and workplaces, we understand how valuable, how important it is for our mental and physical health. I'm going to have to do something, you know, and I suddenly had this inspiration. I'm going to totally change the title. I was familiar with the subtle art of not giving a fuck. And I thought, you know, but I give a fuck. And I think there's too many people in the world who don't. And what I mean by that is they don't take enough accountability. They just say and do what they like without any regard, in social media especially. People say and do what they like without any regard for the consequences of your words, because you've maybe fired off an angry comment because you're just in a bad mood or whatever it is. No regard for how that hits someone and hurts someone. Words can hurt as well as heal. And I'd seen so much of that. And I thought, well, I give a fuck, to keep using the language. So I'm going to change the title of my book, and I'm going to be a bit more hard-hitting in the book. But in a funny, I'll make it light and funny, but I'm really going to knock this message out the park about why we need to be accountable for our actions and why it's so beneficial for our mental and physical health. And I said to Hay House, I want to change the title. The Joy of Actually Giving a Fuck. And I thought, there's no way, you can't change a title 3 months in, because they've already done all the background work. It's already registered on Amazon, all that kind of stuff. But they thought, brilliant. The marketing department said they absolutely love it. So now I had to rewrite the 20,000 words in a totally different style, lighter, more light-hearted, more funny, more, you know, quirky, and then add a whole pile of new research that wasn't really in the original book about how to be kind to yourself, about how to practice kindness in real life. Because let's face it, it's all right reading something in a book, but life happens. So how do you be kind when life happens? You know, in real ordinary life, which was a bit more tricky than you know, just an ideal situation where you see someone maybe drop some or pick that up for them. That's not, that kind of thing happens. But in real life, when you've got people accusing you, well, you've been kind to them, that means you're not being kind to me. Or, you know, someone's been selfish. How do you still be kind to someone that's been selfish? So I explored all that kind of stuff in a quirky, light-hearted way as well. So I love what eventually came out at the end of the book. I'm so pleased that I changed the title.
Yeah, amazing. And, you know, hopefully because of the title and having that F-bomb in there, it gives a bit of impact, right? People will see that and think, yeah, I want to read that book. But that's coming out very soon. In fact, has it been released at the beginning of July?
It's already out, yeah. It came out on the 9th of July, yeah.
Great. So people can basically go and buy that now, wherever they buy their books. And yeah, I'm sure it's going to be amazing. And unfortunately, I've not had a chance to read it fully yet. But
well, you've got your own book. to work
Yes.
on.
Yes, absolutely. And that's
You've got it.
partially, I've been sort of writing and squirreling away in the background, and I'm very grateful for your support with that as well. Now, as a fellow Scot, I felt it was important to sort of chat with you about that, and just I'm interested in any cultural differences in terms of how people practice kindness in their lives, if you know of any research around that stuff.
Yeah. So in the little community I grew up in, I
Mhm.
saw incredible kindness. I saw a lot of neighbours in, because as I said to you, socially and economically, it was a kind of deprived area that I grew up in. But what I saw was everyone pulling together in community. The sorts of things that I haven't really seen as much as what I witnessed when I was a child growing up is the way neighbours just looked out for each other,
Yeah.
supported each other, defended each other. It was really lovely, and it was a great influence on me, recognizing how valuable that actually was. But at the same time, there was always this idea about not getting above your station.
Yeah.
If you seemingly took pride in an achievement, you'd get, if he or she was chocolate, she'd eat herself, kind of thing. So you had to suppress any any talent, anything that showed that you could get out of the situation that everyone was in. And helping others was so, it was so pride, it was so much, it was such a big thing, it was such an important thing, it was given high status. But
Mhm.
doing something for yourself was considered selfish. you
Yes.
know so self-kindness, anything that you did for yourself, was considered selfish. And that I saw in the community when I was growing up in. But it's also something that's very widespread in the Western world. The idea that being kind to yourself is selfish. And I
Yes.
think it's just something that gets stuck in our heads, because we think that self-kindness is just lavishly spending and indulgence at the expense of responsibilities in our lives. But
Yeah.
that's not what self-kindness is at all.
Yeah.
Absolutely not at all. Yeah, we can do lavish things, indulgent things if we need to, but self-kindness can be so nuanced. Self-kindness can one of the things I do, Laura, I get so busy, and I know that if someone needs my help, I always find the time. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'll even put a slot in my diary. So what I now do is I put in my diary a meeting with self. And
Yes.
I block out quarter of an hour, half an hour, an hour. I've seen myself blocking off a whole morning,
Yeah.
literally meeting with self. And
Yeah.
it's not uncommon for me to watch an episode of Star Trek during my meeting with self. But the point I'm making is you use that time for anything you want. And
Yeah.
what I'm doing is psychologically, I'm elevating self-kindness, and that taking time for myself, I'm elevating it. I'm giving it the same level of importance as I would do finding the time for someone else. And it's just, I think it sinks into your mind that my health matters as well. I'm not putting myself ahead of others. I'm
Mhm.
saying my mental health matters as well as others. And recognizing self-kindness can be, if I fill up my own cup, then
Mhm.
there's more of me available with
Yes.
which to help other people. And recognizing what that means for me, what filling up my cup means for me. It could mean doing maths and physics. I love to cook. I experiment when I'm cooking. I learn recipes and I adapt them and stuff. I love doing that as well. I'm not master chef, but I love doing it. But I do it for self-kindness, because I enjoy doing that kind of thing.
Yes, and that bit that you're speaking about there, about the sort of, I guess, the Scottish cultural values about not sticking your head above the parapet, not
Yeah,
being,
yeah.
above your station, and those types of things. And it can get so heavily ingrained in us, can't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Limit ourselves. And even now, as I'm sat writing this book, I'm like, is anyone going to read this? Like, is anyone,
Yeah,
you have these sort of feelings of like, why me? And I
yeah,
just keep sort of pondering with myself, well, why not me?
yeah.
I just think it's so important that we allow ourselves that, and that oftentimes, though, that can involve rewriting the psychology of our past in ways that's quite challenging,
I
I
hear
think.
you. Yeah, absolutely. What I was going to say is exactly the same kind of thing, because what I certainly found was I used to play myself down a
Yes.
lot, and I found myself second guessing myself a lot, because I thought, surely I can't do X, Y, and Z. And then when I did try to express being good at something, because a lot of the people I was seeing around were people who had a similar upbringing to me, I got bullied a lot at school. and they called me big head sometimes, and that was just me being excited and enthusiastic, expecting, when I achieved something, expecting community support. And what I got, the opposite, was people trying to pull me down and ridicule and call me a big head and all. I was naturally good academic things, and I was good at sports and stuff. So that attracted a lot of the wrong sort of attention. And it was really, school, especially in my final year, was really tough. I got really awfully bullied in my final year at high school, you know, and a lot of it derived from that kind of stuff, was me keeping pushing, trying to break through that cultural conditioning I had, but always second guessing myself, which is, you know, I mentioned earlier I struggled with self-confidence, because that self-confidence was always a second guessing myself, where I saw other people say, I've got this idea, and they go away and do something. And for me, it was like, no, I don't think I can do that. And so I found myself taking years to develop in ways, even in confident ways that other people just did right away. Even some things I am afraid of and afraid to do, and I'll put my hand up and say, yeah, I probably let fear, even now as an author of 12 books, stop me or slow me down, or get in my head enough to overly complicate things that other people, having had a totally different experience growing up, would just literally go away and do it when they're 21-year-old.
Yes.
And for me, I still have fear in my head, second guessing enough that I'll overly complicate it, overthink it, and then procrastinate and end up not doing it at all.
Yes, you've just encapsulated my experience of writing a book and what it's been like, and the stop start, and the can I really do this, and will anyone read it, and all those things. And it's such an important part of our coming back to ourselves. I think we sort of lose ourselves through high school, and I had similar experiences of bullying and various things that held me back and made me want to stay small. And, you know, I'm so keen for listeners to hear that someone who has had the success that you've had came from those beginnings, and that you can override the conditioning that that wants to pull us back and limit us. It's great to hear. Now, using kindness as a yardstick, what would you say, David, is one thing that the people who are listening to you today could go off and do from now that will help them in their lives?
I would say just be aware that kindness really matters, and I think the world needs more of it, and not just more thinking about it, but more just recognizing the world's a lot smaller place than we think. And we're all family, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not. We really are all on this big blue marble together, and we might as well help each other out. And given that, just act upon opportunities. You know, you don't have to do big, observable, noticeable things for it to qualify as kindness. What matters more is those everyday things, like checking in on someone you've not heard from for a while, just checking in people, offering people words of encouragement and support. I believe in you, you can do it, kind of thing, rather than criticism. It's all these little things that really make a big difference in the world, and big difference in our own lives. And I think these are the things that make the world feel like a smaller place, and we realize we're not alone in the world. And it's funny, all these little things have ripple effects. I mean, one of the things I talk about in the book is the contagiousness of kindness. Of all the things I've come across in science, kindness is one of the most contagious. You know, we all know about R numbers these days, but kindness is an R number as well. I mean, it's a rough estimate. I've estimated it myself based on some other research, formal research that's been done, and it's somewhere between 3 and 5. But what's really interesting is researchers at Harvard and Yale measured the contagiousness out to what's called 3 degrees of separation. Now, what that means, let's use the R number of 5 to really knock this point home, right? So what this means is every day we do these seemingly small things, little shows of encouragement and support. And then we walk away and we go on with the rest of your day. What you don't see is what happens next. So what happens next is that person who you've now helped, might be with a compliment, a word of encouragement, or a little show of support, or even a checking in, whatever it is, you go on with the rest of your day. Because of how you made that person feel, elevation, because how you made that person feel, that person will now, over the course of the next day or so, will now be kind or kinder to 5 people. On average, that's what the R number means. Roughly, it might be more, it might be less, but it depends on a lot of things.
Yeah.
That person, those 5 people are at 1 degree of separation from you. I think you know where I'm going with this. Because each of those 5 people, if you had a wee drone and you set it to track the behavior of those 5 people, not that you would do that, but if you did, then what you would find is those 5 people over the course of the next day or so, because of how they now feel, will also be kinder to 5 people. And what you now have at 2 degrees of separation from you, 25 people who've benefited from an act of kindness, from your initial little thing that you did or said and then got on with the rest of your day. But each of those 25 people, if you had a wee swarm of drones and tracked them all, what you would find is each of those 25 people would also be kind or kinder to 5 people. So what you now have at 3 degrees of separation from you, from the initial act or words of kindness or show of encouragement or support, what you now have is 125 people benefiting from that kindness. And that's what researchers at Harvard and Yale found, that the intensity of the initial act begins to wane, like a wave begins, like you drop a pebble in a pond and it creates a wee splash. And then you walk away. And what you don't see is the little pebble going like that, and it creates big waves, and the wave gets smaller and smaller and smaller, but it's still there. And at the other side of the pond, there's a wee lily pad going like that. And it doesn't know why it's doing that, but it's doing that because of the wave. But what set the wave in motion was the pebble, but the pebble is a metaphor for an act of kindness that you drop into society. But it moves out in about 125 people. Obviously, that's not a statistically exact thing because it depends on a million things. But I'm just making the point that it's a ton of people benefit from these little things that you do every single day. And if anyone feels listening to this that you're not significant, or that what you say and do doesn't matter, I'm telling you, you make a huge difference every day with the seemingly small things that you say and do.
Yeah, I love that. And it's just this idea of kindness compounding, isn't it? It just compounds and grows and things. And so, yeah, I think we both need to get flooding TikTok and getting that message rippling out. David, honestly, I'm so grateful to you for spending the time with me and my listeners. It's been such a pleasure. Can you let everyone know, if they don't already follow you, where they can go find you and learn more from you?
Yeah, well, I'm on TikTok, Dr. David Hamilton, but my website is drdavidhamilton.com. And from my website, you can find all my other social channels. I'm active on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, Threads, LinkedIn. I basically dabble in all of these kind of things. I'm basically in YouTube. I basically just put kindness videos and general science videos, mind-body connection. I basically farm them out to all of the main kind of social media network. I'm trying to flood the world with understanding and inspiration about the importance of being kind.
Amazing. Thank you, David, so much for being here with me today. And we will have you on again when you publish your next book. I'm sure there's more coming.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure to have a wee blether with you today.
Chat. Thank you.